So my question this morning to you is, what's your most favorite meal you've ever had? Most famous meal. Haggis doesn't count, Elsie. You know it's actually illegal to import haggis to the USA? She says, of course there is. What's your most favorite meal? Come on, anybody. Most favorite meal? Chicken. Steak. Charbroiled oysters from Louisiana. What else? Come on. Your most favorite meal? Lobster. Shrimp. Sushi. Pasta. Noodles. Pizza. Can you remember the place where you had your most favorite meal ever? And why that meal stands out? So my favorite meal ever was in a train that was converted into a restaurant in George on the Garden Route in South Africa. And even Pastor Dave had eaten at that same restaurant. He had steak, but I had the best meal ever. Lobster thermidor. Boiled lobster, scooped out, mixed with butter and cheese and mushroom, put back in the shell, into the oven, out. To die for. The 2 lobster tails I had for $11 in Bluefields in coconut, it gets a second close to that. Food. I feel sympathy for people who do not like food. And there are actually human beings on this earth who just go through the grudge of just eating food, who don't love food. I feel sad for them, really. Because what else is there to live for but food? And food is an important part of the Bible story. People had to eat. And on a few occasions, there were very spectacular meals that people looked forward to. A banquet, an event where you invited your friends and family and you celebrated things. You know, in the book of Luke, Jesus weighs 300 pounds. He's eating all the time. It's all he does. He eats more than he does miracles. Food is an important part of our story, and it's an important part of God's story with us. Psalm 23 has 2 images. We typically always speak about the first image, about the sheep, who the shepherd leads to the green grass, to eat and to drink from the quiet waters, and to be protected. But the second image is of what? Table. Well, that's a pastor. He has an advantage over us. A table laden with food and wine. So much wine, in fact, that David says the cup overflows. You can't drink fast enough because God just keeps on pouring. For 40 years, God provided for the Israelites in the desert. Manna, bread in the morning. Kentucky fly through quail in the evening. For 40 years, they didn't have to go and hunt and look for the food. It was just magically there, morning and evening. The Bible goes on in the book of Isaiah. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, a rich food filled with marrow. Marrow is the new in thing. I mean, $25, $50 in New York for just a bone with a bit of marrow. A well-aged wine strained clear. Isaiah 55. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you that have no money, come. Buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and delight yourself in rich food. Now, if you lived on a very plain diet, didn't get a lot of calories, and were basically always hungry, this is good news. If you are the poor who doesn't have money, the invite from God to come and buy without money and to come and eat without having to pay for it? This is a wonderful image. And as the idea of eternal life developed within Israel's theology, the next question is, well, when we're going to be with God, what are we going to do? And the answer is, eat, of course. So the idea of a banquet with God developed. God's going to put up this huge banquet, and the righteous and the people who follow the law and the good people will be with God. And we're going to feast and drink. In steps Jesus. And Jesus, being Jesus, questions everything. And he changes people's perception of who will be at this banquet, at this feast. The book of Luke. And Jesus also went on to say to the one who had invited him to this lavish banquet, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. Otherwise, they may also invite you in return, and that way, that will be your repayment. Climbing the social ladder back then. But when you give a reception, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Well, why? Because since they don't have the means to repay you for what you repaid, will happen at the resurrection of the righteous. You won't get the reward in this lifetime. You get it after this lifetime. When one of those who were reclining at the table with him heard this, he said, well, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. And who's the everyone? The righteous. The good people. Not the people that Jesus just mentioned. Who are they? The poor, lame, crippled, blind. No, he goes to God will reward those that have done good. Of course, Jesus is not going to take this, but he said to him, well, a man was giving a big dinner, and he invited many. And at the dinner hour, he sent his slave out to say to those who'd been invited, come, for everything is ready now. But they alike began to make excuses. Well, the first one said, I've brought a piece of land, and I need to go out and look at it. Please consider me excused. Another one said, well, I've brought 5 yoke of oxen, and I need to go try them out. Please consider me excused. And another one said, well, I've married a wife, and for the reason I cannot come. So the slave came back, reported this to his master, and then the head of the household became angry and said to his slave, well, go out at once into the streets and the lanes of the city and bring here all the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. And the master said to the slave, go out to the highways and along the hedges, compel them to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste of my dinner. May this be God's living word to us today. So Jesus comes, and he flips the entire theology of his time on his head and says, no, you, the Pharisees, have taught people that people are poor and have physical disabilities and limitations of being crippled, lame, or blind because either your parents did something wrong or you did something wrong. And Jesus says, no. Your theology of cause and effect doesn't work with God. Because you are good and righteous and wealthy, you think that you are the ones who's going to be at the banquet with God because it is your place? Let me tell you, God doesn't work that way. In fact, God invites to the table those that were never invited in the first place. The poor. The ones who have no money to buy food. The ones who cannot invite you back because they have no food to offer you. The ones who don't walk in your circle of influence because you simply exclude them. The ones who have physical disabilities, who according to the teachers of your law say, they've been ostracized by God. They can't go to the temple to sacrifice because they don't have money. And because you say the blind, the crippled, the poor, and the lame, they're not allowed in the temple. They're not allowed at the synagogue. They're not allowed to worship God. You've put up these rules, these barriers to them. But I say to you, the ones most welcome at the table is the poor, are the ones with the physical disabilities. Because God invites them in and says, here is the food. Eat as much as you want. Drink as much as you want. Of course, did that not sit well with the audience of Jesus? Who are the ones that will be at the meal? The ones that we don't expect. The ones that society say, you're on the outside, because we from the inside say you cannot come in. 4 years ago, Valerie Walker invited the staff and congregants to go down to Skid Row to do the foot washing. I have to be honest, I was so apprehensive about doing it. I didn't know what to expect. And so after we got in the water and we'd set up all the stations, the first person came. And it's a visual image of taking off the person's shoes and then their socks and then washing their feet and drying it, putting on some ointment, some foot powder, putting on a clean pair of socks, putting their shoes back on, and then looking in their face and asking them, what happened? How did you lose your job? How long did it take for you to become homeless? And in the end, taking their hands and praying with them in the name of the God who had not forgotten them. In the name of the God who says, you are precious. You might not have a home, you might not have a job, but you're not just a statistic. You are God's people. You are God's beloved. I will never ever see a homeless person the same way. Because they are human beings, not human statistics. On Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, we're going to go down again. And we invite you. Just a few hours out of your year might change the way that you serve others. And look at John 13, the foot washing of Jesus. When he washed his disciples' feet and he said, no one is more important than the one who washes someone else's feet. Last year, I took the last of our Thanksgiving baskets down to OPCC. And as I was driving there to 16th Street, there was all these people walking with these baskets, carrying them, pulling them, 2 people on each side. Man, that felt good. My church folks made those baskets. Our church folk felt so inclined that God had so richly blessed us that we wanted to pay a portion of what we have forward to others. 400 baskets going into our community. There was so much joy of spreading $30,000 worth of goods that families could have a Thanksgiving, that individuals knew there was somebody out there that actually cared for me as a human being. We're going to do 500 this year. 10 of them will go to Westminster TLC in Venice. And 40 will go to Common Ground in Santa Monica, Venice border, for those with HIV/AIDS. And 30 will go to my friend's place in Hollywood. And 415 will go to OPCC, our biggest one-stop provider on the west side. But here's the challenge. It does feel good, and do not negate the fact that it feels good to do good and to see that my gift makes a difference. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think Jesus was a bit of a show of himself. Why do you think he healed so many people? He liked it. Jesus felt good about doing something good for somebody who was blind or lame, who had been bleeding, who had been sick, who was demon-possessed. Jesus thrived on the fact that he did something good for someone. And so should we. Never be ashamed of that. But giving a person a Thanksgiving basket doesn't change the other 364 days of their lives. And this is why we are so thankful as a mission team and as a congregation to work with each of these 4 agencies, to work with their staff, to give them of our money and of our volunteers, because they make the ultimate difference in developing people's lives, that they get off the streets, find work, have productive lives, and have their own housing. These 4 agencies give out more than Thanksgiving baskets. They develop the lives of people.